Tested 1, 2. Can you hear me? Oh, cool. Hold on here. Let me. Okay, test 1, 2. Okay, I was just trying to find mine live there. Oh yeah. Okay. All right. We're back on. We're back on. Thanks for tuning in. We had some technical problems there, but we got it figured out. Before we get started, I wanted to say a few announcements before I introduce our speaker, and I want to thank you for coming on Recovery Warrior Talk. And we were walking last week in the communities on our reservation here, just showing our commitment and our to show the people that they're not alone out there in this fight, that's plaguing our reservations, taking our young people and hurting our older people and just the kids especially, so but sober is good, sober is cool, and I thank you for tuning in, and sticking with us, and we're going to keep going, all of us, Greg Z, Kim, Zena, Rihanna, all the recovery warriors, man. So, come join us. Anybody's welcome. We don't discriminate. We don't care if you got 2 hours of sobriety and come and join us, man. But we got I wanted to read something real quick. It's an announcement. This is going on we're having another Recovery Warrior banquet, and it's called the Yanktawan Nation Recovery Warrior Recognition Banquet. It's a long one there, right? That's a long title, Jim. Thanks to Jim Stone, Fort Randall Casino. This is going to be happening on 9/24 this year. That's in a couple weeks here, few weeks. It's at 6:30 p.m. at the Fort Randall Casino. This is what's going on. The Yankton Sioux tribe would like to recognize and show support for our people fighting the war against addiction. Individuals in recovery, will be recognized, and nominees will be solicited for individual groups who are dedicating their time, talents, and expertise to assist others in recovery. If you would like to submit a nomination, send a one-page letter detailing how the person or group is helping people fight their battle. Nominations can be delivered to the Fort Randall Casino attention. Marcy, email to murib@fortrandallcasino.com, and the deadline is at 5 p.m. on September 20th. So if you know somebody out there that's rock and rolling and need to you want to get them recognized, it's going to be a good night. We'll have a good feed. People will be sharing, so that's going to be good. That's on 9/24 on the 24th of September. So be sure and come up, even just to come have a good meal, and listen to some good good warriors. Also, just wanted to say thank you to everybody that's been sticking with us. Greg Z. We've been hitting all the communities walking, like I said, and we apologize. We didn't get to Greenwood this year, but it can still happen. Maybe in a week or after Labor Day, we could get down there and do the walk down there and get some prayers sent out. That's everybody calls the stronghold down there, and it is pretty powerful down there. So you can feel the energy, and but yeah, just wanted to get that out there, and thank you for everything, all our relatives out there. And what else? We have meetings here at Thursdays, NA, AA support group prayer. It's all good. It's all good when you're sober, so that's our mission, man, to, let people know there's another life out there. You don't need to smoke that joint, or you don't need to take that hit or that drink or pop that pill. It gets easier. You just got to put in the good fight, man. So that's what I wanted to say, and thank the Lighthouse out here for letting us do the show, and for Derek, getting this work done for us. Couldn't done it without his skills there. So got Greg Z sitting in with us too, my bro, and want to introduce one of our elders here on the Yankton Sioux Reservation. Everybody knows him. I've known Vince for forever, and real good elder, and a lot of wisdom, man. If you, I'm pretty sure everybody knows. If you read the paper, he's in the paper all the time. He has a article in there he writes for, and I'm not sure what paper you're in now, Vince. The Lakota Times, the Lakota Times.
Res of the Story.
Yes, Res of the Story. So I'm going to turn this over to Vince, and I just tell us about your journey, Vince, if you could. We'd appreciate your knowledge, and very interested.
How Hamitakupi. That just simply means greetings, however we're related. We always recognize our relationship with each other. That's how we know each other. So I want to thank Leon and Tanshi Greg over here, and all the people who put this program together. They should be commended for their, as Leon said earlier, their commitment to this idea of sobriety. So I'm going to kind of begin with that theme. I was born in 1953, so that's going to make me 72 years old, or young, however you want to look at it, this coming January. Why that's significant is in 1953, as the narrative goes, this was after World War II, and a lot of our men were, and some women were involved in that war. And when they came back from the conflict, a lot of them felt like they did when they were in the service, felt like they should be able to go have a beer or something like that. But at that time, they were prohibited. Our people were not allowed in drinking establishments. We're not allowed to have any kind of liquor or beer or anything like that. And the white men weren't allowed to sell it to us or give it to us. They could face penalties for that, face prosecution. But the veterans, maybe rightfully so, maybe not, depends on which side of the equation you are with that whole issue. But they felt that it was their right, having served in the armed forces, to be able to come back and be able to be served beer or anything like that, just like any other U.S. citizen or like any other veteran. And so they petitioned Eisenhower, who was the president at that time, and through, as far as I was able to understand, through executive order, he opened it up for liquor to be sold on the reservation. At the time we had what's called a no temperance section in one of our treaties that said that we're not allowed to. Our elders didn't want us to have that on the reservation, because I think they kind of knew that's something, if they were to open that up, there would be a lot of trouble, because the few that had gone and they saw their behavior when they were intoxicated and the trouble that it caused, I think had that trepidation that things might get worse. And sure enough, and as I was, of course, just coming into this world, but as my grandpa and my uncles and them tell it, in 1953, it swept. Swept through the reservation like a wildfire. It was open, and a lot of in fact, they used to have a place here east of along the river that's called a tax station, and they used to. It was a bar, and our chief at that time was Madville. Went over and he said, "I don't want you selling any of that or giving any of that to my young men," and because he saw the trouble that it was a cause, and sure enough, you can look back in hindsight, and you can see where it wasn't the beginning, but it was kind of served as an impetus for the collapse of our culture, of our language. And boarding schools had a lot to do with that. But the more than anything, that was the tool that was used either by the U.S. government as a part of their colonization, or because we were human beings, we get addicted to things. And I've heard some of the folks come on here and talk about how you get swept up in that kind of life, and it's real easy to get into, but very, very difficult, if not impossible, for some people to get out of. So I can remember that when I was growing up, I was placed at Marty. So I was kind of
The boarding school?
yes. It was like you see these movies on TV about these concentration camps,
Yeah.
and it was much the same. I
Wow.
mean, they always had nuns, or one of the priests had some young boy, young girl. They were chewing them out about something. Maybe they didn't walk straight in line, or who knows. I mean, there was millions of rules that you had to follow, and it's like a military compound. I mean, you had to endure.
Did you have to go on your own, Vince, or did you get sent there on?
No, my great grandfather Dave Zephyr, along with a couple other older gentlemen, you remember back in those days before the Dawes Act, they call it, where we were allotted land. They once the Allotment Act went through, they gave us each 180 acres, but at the time we weren't considered full citizens. We were not allowed to. Some of them didn't want to manage the land. They wanted us to be farmers. We weren't. We don't come from a farming culture. We come from a hunting gathering culture, and so it's hard for people to adjust. I mean, understandably so. So, in order to be able to sell land, you couldn't do it on your own. You had to get what's called a forced patent fee, which means in those days you had to go clear to Washington, D.C. and the entire Department of Interior and War at that time, Department of War would give you a certificate saying that you were declaring you competent to be able to go ahead and transact this business in terms of if you wanted to sell your land. And of course, a lot of Washitus were coming in, pretty thick by then, and they had these. They opened up a lot of land, what they call homestead certificate, and so once they opened that land, they took the land. You'll read where the Yanktons, we gave up that land. We didn't give it up. It was obtained under duress. It was obtained under threat. But of course, we didn't by then. They already took away our weapons, and even had no way of organizing to fight back in any way. And probably those older folks probably saw it was going to be a losing battle anyway. I mean, look at just to be confronted with the armament of the enemy. So I think a lot of our older folks at that time would be my mom's generation. They gave in to that idea that maybe we could feel good for a little bit, but have some whiskey or some beer or something. And it does it. When you first use it, I don't know, when I was a young man, I tried it, and it makes you feel good.
Yeah.
It makes you feel tough.
Yeah.
Makes you feel like you're the best looking guy in the whole world. Yeah, and you can drive the best,
Yeah.
like a race car driver, and all those things. You think you're the smartest, and you know everything, all of that. But that's all we don't understand at that time. That's all just a bravado. That's the alcohol talking, or the substance, whatever it is that I would learn later. That's that talking. It's not you. So our people plumb onto that real easy. It was easy for them to get involved. So I grew up in a culture after I got out of the boarding school. When I was in third grade, my grandpa Fred Zephyr took me out of it because they were my grandma Lorraine. One time they used to work in down below. I was in St. Cat's, they used to call it. We used to go with the little boys, and she called me and I said, I think I got some pants that might fit you. She said, when you went after school, she said, stop down and try them on. She said, so I said, yeah. So after school, then they let me go down there. And so she said, here, she said, try it on, see if you can fit them. So I took my pants down. I was going to try those on, and Grandpa Brett was watching. He said, who the hell done that? And all up and down my back and my back of my legs, welts.
Mm.
I had the unfortunate problem of having, not what we now understand is enuresis, meaning that you have a weak bladder, Unfortunate, but in those days, the way that they thought to get you out of wet in the bed was to whip you.
Wow.
And so that's what I look forward to every morning for all that time that I was in there. And you couldn't tell anybody about it. They wouldn't believe you. They think you're making it up. And sure enough, Grandpa Fred got mad. So he called the father over there right away. He said, who done this to him? He said, I don't know. He said, Sister Bernard is the one that takes care of the little boy. So he called her over. And he said, did you do that to him? Of course, she lied. She said, no, we don't touch these kids. She said, I don't know how he got like that. Maybe the other boys were done that to him. And the kind of what they used to do is they used to have the high school boys come over sometimes, and they would supervise us little guys. And what they would make us do is they'd make us hold our hands out like this, and turn them up this way, and they'd put orange peels on them. And you have to hold them up.
Orange peels?
Yeah, orange peels. And you have to stand there, and you can't drop them, because if you do drop them, and until they tell you that you can let your arms down, then they put you through a belt line. And everybody has to take their belts on. You have to participate. You don't have any choice about it. You can't say, no, I don't want to do it, because then they'll make you do it too.
Wow.
So I seen all this stuff going on all the time. Cruelty. I mean, you can't go. Everything's about church. Everything's about. You got to sit still. And in those days, Catholic Church was all conducted in Latin, so I had no idea what was going on.
When you say belt line, could you explain that?
Sure, it had everybody would stand in a big line like that, and they'd all take their belts off, and they'd make sure that you brandish the buckle first. So you hold it on that end, and then so they line up just enough to get through, and so you got to run through there. Then of course they'll hit you, when you go through there.
Hmm.
So anyway, it didn't stop me from wetting the bed though. I could never stop. And in fact, it's ironic that the morning when before Grandma called me down to see if those pants would fit, I didn't wet. And I was sure, for some reason, I was sure proud that I was glad that I wouldn't get a whipping that morning. But as it turned out, somebody took even though I had to always check your bottom sheet and your top sheet, blanket, the sister always checked those, and if they're wet, then of course you have to assume the position. You have to pull your pants down and lay over the bed, and you get your licking. And of course, if you cry, then you get worse. So you have to learn to. Probably why I cry now.
You're a boarding school survivor.
Yeah.
I don't know why I think he mentioned that before, and I was like, forgot all about that, Vince, you know?
There's a lot of us around. A lot of us are gone now too. Went through that. Never talk about it. But at that time, I was glad that Grandpa Fred, he took me out of that system, and I was glad to get out of there. But it's almost like getting out of the fry pan into the fire, because what was going on in our family and all families at that time, as I've already talked about, and I was drinking, was going on, and I seen Grandpa Fred.
Was that third grade, Vince?
Yeah.
Okay.
Wasn't until I was in third grade. I seen him one time. One of my uncles was him and a neighbor kid were huffing gas. That was the thing back then. Down at Marty, and they used to have all these big trucks. They did. They're building a lot of buildings around here and stuff at that time at Marty.
I tried that before.
Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyway, he caught him. Somebody told on him.
Oh,
Cornelius was his name. Corny, we used to call him.
I remember
man.
Corny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He got him home, and Grandpa Fred, he took a rubber hose to him, and oh man, I mean, you know, it is more than you should be witnessing as a little kid. But what are you gonna do about it? You know, that's so anyway. I asked years later. I asked Grandpa Fred about that. I said, I know that in our culture we never struck our children. We never used corporal punishment as a way to teach. That they used aunties and uncles were the ones who would get after them. They would just talk to them, you know, to hit them or anything like that. So I said, where did you learn to do that? And by then I was being afraid of him.
Yeah.
I was afraid of him growing up. I was scared of him. And whatever he said was like, you know, his word was God. So anyway, he said, that's what Father Sylvester taught him. He told me, he said, if you love your kids, he said, you're with them. So I wanted to be recognized with them, being liked by them. He said, so I listened to what they told me. And I remember him and Uncle Rich, that every Sunday for, I don't know how many years that they would, every Sunday we have a dinner at Grandpa Fred's, and they get into a big argument, hollering at top of their lungs. And Uncle Greg, he wasn't here yet, but all his brothers and sisters, they're all little. And Greg used to argue with Grandpa Fred, and Grandpa Fred said, you take your kids to church, he said. So Uncle Greg was said, Pop, he said, so why should I take them? He said, they're too little. They don't know what's going on. He said, I don't want to be hitting them or anything like that, to sit there and not know what's going on. So before they get an argument. And so I remember that, how Greg, I seen Uncle Greg pull away. And I think probably the best thing he could do at that time, he started to question what that was all about. And I noticed I never seen him go to church after that. And I certainly don't blame him for choosing to. Years later, he would choose to go back to traditional teachings and stuff like that. So anyway, that's where. So that kind of, when in my teenage years, that led me into, like most teenagers, after all that stuff I was going through, and my folks were drinking all the time. So that's what I was raised in. So kind of in a way, when you're raised around people who use, your parents, your family, whatever, that gives you permission. And it gives you permission to, when you want to experiment and all that, well, of course, you know, they're doing it. And might even, one of my uncles would sneak you a sip of beer here in Hunter.
I can relate to that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, so it's they didn't intend to, and I'm not blaming them, but I'm just saying that's how it was back then.
Yeah.
That's the way things were. So you kind of slip into that lifestyle of using, and so that's what was happening with me. I was starting to get in trouble. I was starting to stay out late, and getting into stealing gas and all kinds of that kind of a life that comes with using and hanging out with guys that this first time I was introduced to pot. Now, even at one time when I used to live in Yankton, that's kind of my old stomping grounds when I was a teenager. I used to deal too. I used to sell pot because there was a lot of people wanted it, and it was easy to get. So anyway, that led me into, and I started one of my uncles was hooked on wine. He liked the white port.
Yeah.
the old whiteboard, and so I'd sneak, I'd sneak a nip of it. One time I came back and he passed out at the house because he used to stay with us. And he left his jug sitting there. He passed out on the couch. He left his jug, so I took it. And I was using it at that time too, so I took it and I drank it down. I set it back. Boy, was he ever mad in the morning.
Was that the teenage? Was you a teenager?
Teenager,
Oh,
yeah. So boy, I was already jumped both feet into it,
Yeah.
Starting to, like I said, really starting to get in trouble. And then AIM came along. This would be in the late 60s, early 70s. AIM came along, and there was something I had never heard before. I heard my family, Grandpa Predna, would talk about treaties, different things like that. So there was that connection, but it was only like a superficial connection back to the history of our people. We weren't raised around like ceremonies or that kind of, all that stuff was all to come later. But in 62, there was this movement, this awakening. AIM made where these leadership were talking about culture, and they're talking about returning to our spiritual ways, all kinds of things like that. And for once, you start feeling a sense of, you could hold your chest out, you could feel a little pride. So I started growing my hair. And it was right about in that time when they were starting to explain. I started going to sweats and stuff like that. And I started to understand what, and needed that reassurance that being Indian was nothing to be ashamed of, that there was a lot there to be proud about. But I didn't, and our family didn't know, and a lot of families didn't. I'm not just saying it's just us, but that was a thing then. I mean, if you were to, Grandpa Fred always said that he didn't want to teach how to speak our language. He was fluent. He'd have, I remember Dallas Chief Eagle and different ones would come over, and both Delmer Arrow and all these older folks would come over, and they'd come visit Grandpa Fred all the time. After they'd eat supper, and they'd sit out in the porch, and they'd sit out there and smoke cigarettes and drink coffee.
Was that in Yankton or?
Ravinia.
Oh, Ravinia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ravinia and Lake Andes. But I would just sit and listen. I got to where I could get the gist of what they're saying. But of course, you being a young guy, you don't butt in and say, "What's that?" and "Who's that?" Because they'll get after you.
Yeah.
Who means your leg? Go play or something like that. But I was interested then. I was especially the first time I seen one of our elders with long hair and braids. I was really fascinated by that. Almost because of our indoctrination, I thought of him like a girl. He must be a girl because he's got long hair. See,
Yeah.
that's how much that shaming, how it shifted our perspective of who we are. So growing up, I seen Grandpa Fred didn't want to teach his children, because I asked him about that later. He said, "Well, I didn't want them to learn the language," he said, "because they'd be made fun of." He said, "It's our own people, our own family, even, the different ones that were, by then, some had split off into being Episcopal, some are Catholic. And Grandpa Fred was a staunch Catholic. When I say staunch, I mean double underline that word. When I got to live with him, you had to go to church every Sunday, and there was no equivocation. You got up. If you didn't get up, well, then what he did was he used a bucket like that, but he'd have it full of ice water, and he'd pour that on you. He'd warn you the night before, if you don't get up, you're gonna. So sure enough, one of my Freddie and Corny, not so much, but every now and then they would. I don't think they wanted to go to church, but he would pour water, so you'd have to get him back.
Yeah.
Like that, they can't breathe. But that's how he was. You had to go and you had to listen, or he meant. He said you're going to get a whipping. He meant it.
Yeah.
So to this day, I have a lot of problems with people who use whipping as a form of discipline. I don't agree with it, but that's another podcast.
Yeah.
Just that in by itself.
Yeah.
So right at that time, AIM came along. So it kind of turned my head a little bit. And I started growing my hair, and Uncle Dalbert and my Grandpa Dalbert and Grandpa Fred, they started an Indian Center in Yankton. And so I was getting a little bit older, and then we helped clean out that barn where they used to have that kind of unshika. but the spirit was there. The movement back to, or I don't know if it's back, but to emerged, the emergence of our cultural ways and our
The energy was there.
yeah, it was there, and it was all covered up all that time by
Yeah.
all the drinking and all the nonsense that we were going through at that time.
Was there a large native population in Yankton?
Yeah, there was. And almost everybody from around here, and some from Santee, even Omaha, around Winnipeg was there. They lived in Yankton because at that time there was I don't know if you wouldn't remember this, but there's a place called Gurney's.
Well, I remember
Yeah.
that.
Okay, so a lot of employment down there. You don't have to have like a GED or you didn't even have to speak good English as long as you go in there and they knew how.
My
You could
mom
learn.
said There's a lot of jobs on at the state hospital.
Yeah, there were, but not as many as that. And Alta State Hospital, you had to be a little bit more. How would you say a little bit more education to work with some kind of patients. So that's true.
Hmm.
So anyway, there was this kind of a collective movement towards. We started traveling around with the aim, and during that time is when it kind of occurred to me, listening to Grandpa. By then, he was not only staunch Catholic, but he turned he's a teetotaler, and he went the opposite. He didn't like it because my uncle saw it and went into service, and when they came back, they all had a drinking problem, and he was mad about that. In fact, when me and Freddie, when I turned 17, I was going to go in. This was during the Vietnam War. I went in because my dad and all my uncles were all in the service. I thought, well, gee, I should too. It's kind of this a natural path there for me. But Grandpa sat me and Freddie down. And he said, I don't want you boys going in the service. So he said, so he told about my uncle how they come back. They be drinking, they turn into drunkards. Well, he was really against drinking. So I kind of picked up on that. And so I started to really get deeper and deeper into, mostly I started into selling. And if you're anybody that deals, they know that you learn to shy away from your product. If you use it up, you ain't got nothing to sell, So, it was.
It's still like that.
Still like that, yeah. I believe that. So right about that time when
As
AIM
far as
came
I
along,
know.
that's when I woke up. I kind of came to it and I said, we say we're warriors, and yet we let that brown, whatever's in that brown bottle beat us. So I kind of, there was a kind of a group thinking that was going on that we have to, if we're going to turn our backs on being influenced by the Washichu culture and like that, then that's the main thing that we have to start battling against. And so there was that emergence of sobriety was becoming the thing. Unfortunately for a lot of us that came up through that, we went into other things. We branched off into pot or whatever else was around at that time. So that was kind of the beginning of my break with that you can call it using culture. That's what I call it, where you hang out with people who use, and all people, those of you that have got caught up in that, and have come to realize that there's a better life that you can have, but it takes a long time. It's a journey. That's one thing I want to make sure that people take away from when I talk, is that recovery is it's a journey. It's not something that happens overnight. It takes a long time, because it's not just the best tool you have. When I started to recover, what I didn't learn till later on was that the best tool you have is abstinence. You have to stay away from the whatever it is that you're being your addiction that you're battling with. But it's not just that. You have all the behaviors that come with it, and you have all the trouble that you caused and things that you've done in your family and in your community, and all of that's all part of that recovery. So when you one of the things I like, some people I don't like for the 12-step program, but one of the things I think is really strength building, and that is that final step, and that's when you have to make amends. And that's the hardest step to go up to somebody that you might have maybe maybe you got with their wife when you're drinking, or maybe you stole from them, or you did something, and so there you grow up with that resentment, that hatred towards each other. And every time you drink, well, then it all comes out, and there's a big
Yep.
battle about that. Pretty soon, families are fighting. I mean, that's just part of it. I mean, some of it is historical too. Like some of these families used to, like some of the Pobla family, like old Cecil Provost used to tell me stories about Marty when his folks would tell him, when you go to school, he said, don't talk Indian because they're going to punish you for that. So when he would get together with the other full bloods around that still spoke their language, of course they had to do it quietly, but that was their natural language that they wanted to speak. And so, but you had other families that would turn them in. Those guys were talking Indian over there, so they get whipped.
Yeah.
That. So that created a resentment between them when they were growing up, and so later on when they.
And it probably wasn't even their fault. They were probably
No.
just scared,
Sure,
I mean,
they were trying to survive too,
Yeah.
like everybody else.
Yep.
I mean, you learn that as you grow up, and as you were saying earlier about, it takes time. It's a process. It's not something that goes on all your life. I don't know if there's ever an end. I don't know if there should be, but I don't think there's this day where you wake up, oh, good, hallelujah, I recovered. I think it's something that you go through all your life because there's so much damage that's done
Yep.
to yourself, that relationship that you have with yourself, and the relationship with your children, and if you had more than one spouse. I mean, just imagine all the many people that you touched in your life, and you harmed and hurt by not knowing it. A lot of times not meaning to, but nevertheless, it's like collateral damage. It's the nature of that lifestyle. It's like that story about that young boy's climbing this hill, and he having a hard time, and it's kind of cold, and there's a snake crawling along, and the snake said to my relative, he said, I'm having a hard time. He said, you think you can help me up to the top of the hill? He said, I have to get up. It's warmer up there. He said, I don't know. He said, he looked at him. Sure enough, he had a rattle.
Mm.
He was a rattlesnake. He said, oh, no. He said, you might bite me. So that rattlesnake said, no. He said, why would you do that? Why would I do that? He said, my relative, he said, you're trying to help me and do a good turn for me. He said, I wouldn't turn on you like that. So, okay, he said. So he took him and put him in. Sure enough, boy, get him right off the bat. So right away, he threw him down. He said, I thought you said you wouldn't bite me. So that snake said, you knew what I was when you picked me up.
Hey.
So that's a good lesson to learn that
Yep.
these young folks, you can tell them about it. If they don't listen, then at some point, then you say, well, then, I told you, and I explained to you what's going to happen. And at some point, they have to experience the consequences for their behavior. And not enough of that is around anymore. And that goes back to, I think that goes back to our cultural teaching, and that is that you allow for consequences to happen so that you can learn the lesson. Not like I heard the story where they would even allow their children to crawl up to the fire and don't let them fall in, burn up, but let them touch that. And then see, that's where people talk about what's the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Wisdom comes when you're a toddler and you're walking, you already know how to cry because that gets you fed, already suckle at your mom's breast because that's where your food is. All those things are instinctive. So you start walking, you're just learning, all of a sudden, boom, you hit your head on a table or something. Oh, that's when wisdom begins, because that is how we start to experience the world the way it really is. And so I think it's our job as parents, grandparents, and relatives to talk to these young folks. But it's more than that. It's to get well yourself. Recovery is about changing that all, because what's happened when you're in a dysfunctional system, like a family that's drinking, your moral compass is all twisted around. You don't know what's good, what's bad, what's normal. That's why you see a lot of our families, you see molestations going on, things that should not be there, and they're really, really hard to heal. they're hard because those kind of, when you talk about sexual predation and sexual abuse, I mean, it's hard. It's physical abuse and all these other, but in some ways that's the hardest one I've seen. Being in a counseling field for about 40 years, a lot of people who are in recovery can't get past that.
Yeah.
And so at that point, all I used to do is you ask them if they're interested in going and using like the Red Road approach. Which some people would rather do that, and that's fine. If you want to, go to sweats and maybe work it out that way with other older relatives, that process, or you can go to a professional. And I would leave that up to them. But because some people were never raised in a culture, so they don't understand what the sweat is and all about, and they're not really interested in getting involved, and that's fine. I mean, you can't force people to even though there is a lot of help, there's a lot of value in recovery. That's part of just part of the tools that you learn to pick up, and these seven rights that go along with all. So there's a lot there that would take a lot to talk about too. But so a lot of when you either been sexually abused, like I was growing up, I was molested, and that takes years. And I'll tell you that in our family was one of the worst times we had to get that out on the table. But we did eventually. We had down at the Sundance grounds. Grandpa Fred, in spite of all his faults, one of the things that he was able to accomplish is in 1976 he brought the Sundance back to our people. We had been kind of in a spiritual drought, you might say, because of the influence of all the Christendom that had descended on our people at that time. But they wanted to break out of that. And AIM had a lot to do with that. So Grandpa and Freddie, they went up and talked to the pipe keeper and asked permission if they could. They wanted to have a Sundance down here. They wanted to start it. He told them then. He talked with old man Fool's Crow. And he asked him, "We want to have a Sundance." He said, "Well, we want to get your permission." He said, "You don't need my permission." He told him, "That's your right. As a Indian people, you have that right." So, but Fool's Crow did agree to come down and help him get started. So that very first year.
I remember meeting him and going and stuff with
Yeah.
Fusco,
Yeah. Yeah, that was in 76. And I danced in 77. That's when George Eagle Elk. So over the years, I had different guys come. But the important thing is that that's a good tool to have to recover, is to have some sort of a spiritual foundation, because it's foundational. That's why I'm saying it takes the whole life, because it might take you all that time to figure it out. There's a lot of things that we went through. We may not ever have answers to why things were, because that's a question we always ask. Why did this have to happen?
So like when the Sundance come back, Vince, do you think did you see did it make a change for the warriors around here, your relatives and the people that were struggling? I mean, did you see it make a change in them? I mean,
Sure. For those that engaged,
yeah.
right? It's like anything, you get out what you put in.
Yeah.
So if you're not people who are deep into their addictions, you already know this. I know I'm singing to the choir, but people that are deep into their addictions and that way of life, that way of what they call a stinking thinking, like I said, your moral compass is all twisted, so you don't have an idea of what norm should be. You don't have an idea about that, so you're trying to figure that out. And for those that were searching for that normal, for that foundation for what it means to be Dakota, that was the way to do it. To go back and experience the Sundance and start to learn about the Nepi and all that sort of. This old man named Foreman used to live in Ravinia. He's gone a long time ago, but the very first sweat I went into, just a little bitty Mushika sweat, maybe 4 or 5 guys in there, and real close to the rocks. But I experienced that, and I started to have more and more of those experiences. And I saw the fellowship. I hear that word fellowship that it created, and the people. If you want to get to know a man, is to pray with him. I believe that, and like you said, sweat or even a pipe ceremony, and you hear them pray. If you pay attention to what they're praying about, that tells you what their struggles are. So you don't have to ask a lot of questions. You know, and a lot of times guys aren't, especially guys, are a little bit reluctant to talk about these sorts of things. But we're not taught to wear our emotions on our sleeves, so to speak. We're taught to hold that in. It's like I was telling you, what even Marty had a lot to do with me. If you get whipped, well, then you don't. And then, of course, years later, stereotypes you see in the movies. Well, Indians, when they get tortured, they don't cry out.
Yeah.
Maybe that's true. I don't know, but I'll tell you what. If you're getting whipped at, you're in a third grade, it's going to hurt.
Yeah.
You're going to start crying, and that's normal.
Yeah.
But when you're taught that it's not normal to cry, well, then so what do? Is you stuff it, and you stuff it. And the only time it comes out when you get drunk, and you know what alcohol is it releases all the inhibition. So what do? You take that anger out on those that are easiest victims. That's your wife, your husband, your relatives, your children, people in the community. So you can see that violence, how it starts with yourself. Quakers have a real good saying. It says, if you want peace in your community, peace in your home, then let it begin with you.
Yeah.
But you have to practice, kind of going back to what I was saying earlier. If you're going to teach these younger folks, you got to practice it.
Yeah.
That's the best way to teach. Then you don't have to say, see, this I told you, it's not going to work either.
Yeah.
Because then you're making yourself arrogant and above everybody, and that's not what it's all about.
Yep.
It's about emulating, and it's about showing them it's a better life. And I try to do that in my life. I try to. I mean, because of getting away and not being involved in that part, I ended up 2 tours, in Italy, traveling around the world and almost all over. I think I've been to every state in the United States, performing somewhere, playing concerts.
So I think you were like probably one of the first ones, Vince, like to see alcohol come to the reservation and start right
Yeah,
at the beginning.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow. So like Greg's dad did. That's the first Sundance that started.
Grandpa, yeah, it'd be Grandpa,
Oh.
yeah.
And then your dad carried it on.
No.
Yeah, they were all involved.
He brought it back to Uncle Greg. They appointed him as a Sundance.
Oh yeah.
He took-
But you talk about George and Crow Dog and all those guys were involved in it.
Yeah, yeah.
Crow Dog East, I like that. We talked about this one down here, that first one, I like. You like that. He said one day they're gonna have to get back to just one dance. Where would you hold that at? And he said down there. Where they brought it back to the eggs. He said that's where.
7 Mile Creek, yeah. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, you know how it happens with denominations. They couldn't agree, so Asa started his own Sundance out there, and President Steve Red Buffalo had his own Sundance, and then they had another one going on in Lake Andes, and now they got 2 Drapo brothers, each have their own Sundances. So so I learned this word homogeneous means, and I don't think this was ever true, but we tend to stereotype or people having one belief and being seen. When people use the word unity, they tend to think that means that we all have to agree all the time. That's not true. What unity is about being able to rise above the petty stuff. Like you'd hear arguments about, well, you don't have you're supposed to get you're supposed to have start out with the tree. You're supposed to have a virgin, means a young girl, and they have to be marked in a certain way. So you have all these little rules,
Yeah.
and so what I learned over the years is that each one has their own rules, and that's the way it is. So if you want to go to Steve Red Buffalo's Sundance, then if you go out there, then out of your respect because we have this saying that you respect your brother's vision. Whatever his vision is, that's his. It's not for you to say he's right or he's wrong, or I mean that would be presumptive. But that's what starts causing battles between the right way and the wrong way, and you see that going on. So all I can tell you, folks that are listening, and I learned over the years, is be careful with any of that stuff. So I always, what Grandpa said was, listen to what a person says, but watch what he does, and that's when you'll see the truth of who they are. And so I've tried to live by that adage, all these years. That if someone can brag all they want about, all the accolades that they have, and if they're out and they're sitting there, don't be smoking cigarettes. They're not good for you. And they're sitting there lighting up.
Yep.
Young people aren't stupid. They can see that. You can see the
Yeah.
hypocrisy of that.
Yeah.
For real. And they always tell the truth too, I mean, the young ones, I mean, the kids, and yeah. So Vince, when did you start writing for the paper?
Years ago, there was this. I know you know his name's Tim Gallego.
Yeah.
He started the Lakota Times. The original one was in Pine Ridge. And at that time, you remember, this was back in the early 70s. This is about the time when they had Wounded Knee, that takeover. And so he was, a lot of the local people, I was going to college at Madison at the time, at Dakota State. And there was a lot of local people who were talking about, see, a lot of these guys that were, like in anything, there's those that are, it's like this red road, black road stuff. There's always those that get it, and what being a what we call it so what that means about being responsible for yourself and those that are in your sphere of existence. I mean, so there's that. Then there's the users. Like I said, their moral compass is so skewed that what's normal to them is to use and rip off and get high and do all those things that are associated with that. And to them, that's normal. So you have that tension that's going on there. And a lot of these guys that were in name were that I'm not going to name names because I'm not about that. But there's some real nefarious, I'll use that word, elements that were part of AIM, and which probably ended up being what weakened it in the end. And it's not a everyday word of today. I mean, it had its time. It started. You hear them now. They call wokeness is like a bad thing. If you learn, why we are in the crap that we're in sometimes. You have a thinking that we don't want to know about that because it might make us feel bad. Well, boo-hoo. You're going to have to look at that stuff if you want to get better. There's no way around it. I mean, if you have a broken leg, it's going to take some doing to set that thing straight so it heals right.
Yeah.
If you don't, then it's not going to heal right, and you'll never be the same. So recovery is like that too. It's brokenness. But it's more than just physical. It's emotional. It's intellectually. You're broken. You can't think straight, and it's spiritual too. I mean, it's. So they broke us apart to begin with. The Catholics have their way, and they don't like the Episcopals. The Episcopals don't like the Presbyterians, and etc. And they all don't like. I asked Sister Miriam not long ago, maybe a decade or so ago. I said, "So, Sister Miriam," I said, "Well, what was the reason that you're here? Why are you here?" I was going to get into a discussion about the church. I like to argue about that kind of stuff back then, before I learned better. But anyway, she said, "Well, she said, to tell you the truth, she said, I'm here to stop the Sundance." So that was a real eye-opening response. That's in fact what they were here for. They were here to transplant our culture, our language, that's what the boarding school set up designed to do in the first place. It was designed to destroy and replace that indoctrination. It's so deep. I mean, I hear people who have broken away from the church, but I mean, 50, 60 years later, they still have nightmares about hell. even though they don't believe in hell anymore, they don't buy that story. Christian tries to teach. Still, our subconsciouses are so susceptible to that being told this is the truth and this is not the truth, and because we in recovery, part of us is trying to figure out what's true and what's not true, and how do you tell what's true and what's not? Sitting Bull himself said, take what's good and use that. And he's talking about everything, not just white men, but our own. He was getting at drinking, what they were always concerned about. But our people weren't ready to hear that at that time. They were too busy, caught up in the using mentality. They thought that there was power in that. There's no power in it other than destruction. That's all that can come out of it.
Yeah.
Because drinking leads you to violence, and what do you get when you're violent? You get more violence. That's why you can't solve problems that way. I'm a firm believer that if you're going to resolve conflict, it has to be done in a peaceful way. It has to be done at a table, putting the issues on. It begins with conversation. Here's the problem, and then start talking about ways to solve it, rather than pointing fingers and blaming. We don't know. People will say, "Well, how come you guys didn't like?" Now today we're having discussions about the Constitution. I'm on a revision committee, and there's a lot of that retribution going on. And say, why did you guys do this back then? And, well, I mean, pick your adjective. Maybe we were stupid. Maybe we were all high, or maybe we were all had our heads turned on backwards. I don't know. Do you want to spend all your time investigating why things weren't done, or do you want to turn that energy into realizing that we may have made mistakes, and we all have, but the point is that we have an opportunity to do something today. We can make things better. We don't have no magic wands or anything like that. Go around and touch people on the head and say, okay, you're all better now, go about your business. That's not how recovery works. It's one step at a time, and sometimes it's what the recidivism is all about, and relapse. Sometimes life just becomes so hard. It's like pushing a rock uphill. It gets to be so heavy, and you try your best. You do everything you can to stick with whatever your program is, to stay sober and all that. But sometimes circumstances get overwhelming. It happens to everybody. Some people find a way out for themselves, and they're able to recover. So that's what that word recovery. What are you recovering from? You're recovering from all that avarice and all that pain and all the trouble that you've gone through, and trying to figure out how not to let that be the guide to the future. Because all of history, if you think about it, is an illusion. It only exists in our heads. It's gone. You can't do nothing about it. Nobody's ever invented a way, and science is telling us that there's no way to turn the universe back on its heels and say, well, we start going backwards. So, meaning that you can't reverse time. So what the past is all about, our past with the Shichu and all that, is to learn from it, to use that as a guide for how we live now. We live now. We don't live back then. And how we live now, when we can see that connection, we can see the connection into the future, meaning how ought things be for us in the future? Ourselves, our families, our community. How should it be? Well, that comes about because we have to agree on it. So that's why dictatorship is never going to work, because you have one man telling everybody else what to do. And there's always rebellion. History will tell you that. And our people, we're part of what's called a confederation. We didn't have no chief. The way this is all Hollywood stuff. The word for our leaders is Itancha, which means to speak. E is part of the mouth speaking for the people. So you're a spokesperson. So they had to say one time our economy was a buffalo economy, right? So whenever the buffalo, they move at certain times of the year because they follow their own natural ways of a buffalo. And since we depended on them for our livelihood, we had to know all that stuff. We had to pay attention to them. So whenever they get ready to move, then they point the elders get together and they say, we're going to ask you to be the, maybe the hunting chief or whatever it is. Yeah.
In your 72 years, like in your decades,
Yeah.
is there like for the 90s worse than the 80s, or is it like in 2024? How was that compared to like the early 60s or the 70s? Is it worse than now, or is it is it the same, or how do you
Good question. Very good question. Something I think about quite a bit. Kind of that retribution issue I just brought up about blaming people for why things weren't done now and all that. So let me finish that thought about. So we use history as a way to inform how we live today, and what we do today is setting the path for how we're going to live in the future. We're not going to be there. So at some point, we as elders have got to take the next generation up to that point where you have to hand the baton on to them. Here, it's up to you, young people. And I'm here if you need help or if you advice. I'll provide that. But now it's up to you to carry that ball. Okay, so always, if you study history at all, including our own oral history, you'll always uncover that whatever we're doing now is on the shoulders of those that lived before us. So you build on what they already discovered, and they learn like medicines and stuff like that. Well, the 7 rights, they're all there's controversy about that, but my thoughts about it is when this woman brought this sacred pipe. It's not a historical event. It's not something that you could prove either happened or didn't happen. I mean, that's really not the issue. The issue is it could be somebody's vision, but the issue is that what our people were able to do, they were very sophisticated psychologically. These 7 rights are all about, when we get done praying, what do we say? Yeah. It's all about relationship building. It's all about that. So these 7 rights, when you study them, they're all about maintaining that relationship with each other, because we recognize that we succeed, we flourish more than just survive. We flourish when we do it together, when we work together. No man can get up and say, "I'm a self-made man," because that's really not true. You always depend on other people in your life, whether it's your parents, your relatives, or when you're growing up, to guide you on how you're supposed to be. Sometimes that's broken.
Support groups or
Yeah.
support-
Sure. Sometimes that's broken. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the challenge each of us is issued by our life, and that is to figure that out for yourself. And that's what, to me, what parents, if you want to discipline children, teach them to think critically, to think about, don't just believe something just because somebody
Yeah.
tells you, because they could be fooling you.
Yeah.
But teach them how to know the difference between what's true and what isn't true. Now, that sounds easy, but it isn't.
Lead by
Con men are
example.
good, boy. Con men
Yeah.
are really good at fooling you. Yeah,
Yeah. Or lead by example,
exactly.
that's
Exactly.
that's what I try to do for my kids, or they're not kids anymore, but
Yeah.
they were when I was in my addiction, and they seen the worst of me, so, but now I got some little bit of years in, so uh, I don't want to say I'm never going back to that life again, but I'm not today, and that's just hearing your story, Vince. It's just that addiction just has one thing, and that's to take you down, I mean, like it just so much involved, man. That's what I grew up with. I thought it was normal that's what we did to celebrate, go smoke a joint,
Sure.
go drink. That wasn't normal. That's what I grew up thinking that's what we're gonna do when a good thing happens, we're gonna go get drunk, we're gonna go smoke, we're gonna, and then meth came into the scene and that was even worse. I mean, for me. And so yeah, it's all about you know, it, you gotta be a warrior,
Yep.
you have to warrior up and just try to get some help, and so,
Remember, history is two things. It's both descriptive and prescriptive, meaning descriptive means how were things back then? So you're going to hear all kinds of different stories depending on the elder you talk to. Prescriptive means that those elders were trying to teach us, it's like Sitting Bull said, what were his words?
Yeah.
Take what's good and leave what's bad.
oh,
Oh,
okay.
I hate to interrupt.
Yeah.
The hour stream, it'll
Yeah.
us off on its own.
oh, okay. All right.
Well, I wanted to, before we get cut off, I just wanted to thank our elder Vince here. I wish we had more time.
That was good. It was pretty much-
Yeah, it was, I want him to come back again if he will. Our streaming's going to cut off here. It only gives us an hour. So, if you'd come back again, Vince, we'd
Part two
appreciate
would be,
part 2.
Yeah.
there you go.
Yeah.
Pidama, don't
Yeah.
stop, don't
So,
stop.
I just want to thank you for tuning in. He's going to come back again. We need to hear this and
Yeah.
carry it on to, help us in our recovery and to teach our children, so, thank you, Vince, very
Oh.
much.
Thank
For
you. That was
everything.
very insightful.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, talking about that's something that,
Yeah, we
that
need
can
to,
carry on and
we need to.
It's just gonna cut us off.
okay.
Oh.
I want to thank Greg Z, for being here, and my bro always doing what he's doing on this reservation, cleaning it up, and Wash Day. Thank you. And for Derek and all the recovery warriors out there. See you next Friday.